Not run to replace Justin Trudeau as Liberal leader and Prime Minister. She made the announcement after the party released the rules for the party leadership race. Marina von Stackelberg has your details.
My job today and my choice today is I'm putting my country first.
Melanie Joly says she was ready to be the first woman to lead the Liberal Party of Canada. But she wasn't ready to leave her job as Foreign Affairs Minister.
And the reality is I can't do both.
Joly is the second cabinet minister after Dominic LeBlanc to decide against a leadership run. Both said they needed to focus on dealing with incoming U.S. President Donald Trump and his threats to Canada.
I'm foreign minister at a time that is crucial in our history, and Canadians are anxious.
A number of Liberals have said they were waiting to see the rules for the race before deciding on whether to run. Those rules are now out and require candidates to put up $350,000 to enter, the highest amount in Canadian history. The new leader will be chosen in just under 2 months. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Canadian Medical Association believes a capital gains tax rate increase is discouraging people from careers in family medicine. The CMA is calling on the federal government to stop collecting it on medical corporations. Association President Dr. Joss Reimer says last June, the Canada Revenue Agency began collecting taxes on 2/3 of the profits earned by medical corporations. It used to only be half. She says family doctors operate like small businesses, and it's hurting their bottom line.
And so this is like a retroactive tax on everything we saved through our corporation that happens after we pay income tax, after we pay all of our staff, pay to keep the lights on. There's this additional tax that's happening. And the reason that we're particularly worried is because it's affecting especially family docs working in the community who are just trying to run a practice.
Reimer says the capital gains tax was not approved before Parliament was prorogued. She wants the government to stop collecting the tax and permanently eliminate it. Hear more on this story in the next half hour right here on Radio Noon. An advocate for homeless people says many go to hospital emergency departments to get warm because there aren't enough drop-in shelters in Winnipeg. This week, a man died while waiting for care at the Health Sciences Centre ER. We're told the waiting room was packed at the time, and a number of people were there seeking shelter from the cold. Al Weeb experienced homelessness years ago. He says he would go to HSC to warm up from time to time.
But I was one of those that was smart enough to not overstay my welcome. And, stay for 2 or 3 hours and then leave. And before, and don't go to triage, right? Just walk in and hopefully you get by the security guard and don't have to go to triage. But many times I would go to triage and then before my number came up, I would leave, right? And this happens over and over again.
Weeb says people have no choice because there aren't enough 24/7 drop-in spaces where people can get out of the cold, keep warm. At this point, the wildfires in Southern California have killed at least 10 people and destroyed more than 10,000 homes and buildings, but some progress was made overnight. The Palisades fire is now 8% contained, and the Eaton fire is 3% contained. Meanwhile, more Canadian firefighting assets and personnel are expected to arrive in Los Angeles today. Quebec is sending 2 more water bombers. One of the 2 planes already deployed to Los Angeles was knocked out of service yesterday after it hit an unauthorized drone. Lauren McCallum explains.
The Los Angeles Fire Department says the water bomber was trying to put out the Palisades fire when it struck the drone. Spokesperson Christopher Thomas says it caused significant damage to the plane.
On the left side of the plane, that wing has a fairly substantial hole in the leading edge of it. But I don't know if they're going to have to replace the whole wing or if they can just replace that part of the plane.
He says once repaired, the plane will still have to be certified to fly again, knocking it out of service when it's needed most. Thomas says the Quebec water bombers are vital to the wildfire operation because they're the only aircraft in the fleet that can scoop up ocean water to put out fires. He's relieved the province will be sending 2 more to California.
That is fantastic. We will not turn that away. That is extremely generous.
The Federal Aviation Administration is investigating the collision and says anyone caught flying a drone during a fire operation can face hefty fines and a year in prison. Lauren McCallum, CBC News, Montreal.
And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump will not go to jail or face fines for his criminal conviction.
Under all the circumstances of this case, its unique posture and the defendant's status as president-elect, the people recommend a sentence of an unconditional discharge.
Justice Juan Merchan sentenced Trump in New York court this morning. The sentencing closed the case stemming from hush money paid to a porn star. Merchan says the law affords extraordinary protections to the office of the president, but not to its occupant. Trump now has a judgment of guilt on his record and will be the first president to take office with a felony criminal conviction. Trump appeared in court virtually and again called the case a witch hunt. And that is your CBC News from Winnipeg. In Winnipeg, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with temperatures to minus 14. Brandon, light snow at times, a high of minus 8. Dauphin, a mix of sun and cloud, a high of minus 10. Flin Flon, periods of light snow this afternoon, a high of minus 14 degrees. Thompson, a mix of sun and cloud, looking for a high around minus 20. And in Churchill, a chance of light snow today with a high around minus 26.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk. Good to be with you. Happy Friday. Well, coming up this hour on the show, another data breach, this time involving an application used to store student information that's used by 28 of 37 Manitoba school divisions. Coming up on our call-in conversation, how worried are you about IT companies having access to your information, or are you impacted by this data breach? Give us a call after 12:30. Plus, Brandon's annual Nuit Blanche happens tomorrow, and coming up, we're going to find out what surprises are in store for this year's edition. But up first, we're going to hear why the Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association, is calling on the federal government to change the way it taxes capital gains. Well, until this past year, the government only taxed half of the profits people made from selling an investment property or stocks. It's called the capital gains tax, and it's a tax which typically impacts wealthier Canadians more. On June 25th, the federal government began taxing 2/3 of the profits. In other words, they raised what's called the inclusion rate. But the Canadian Medical Association is calling on the federal government to drop that inclusion rate back down. Dr. Joss Reimer is CMA president, and we've reached her here in Winnipeg. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So why do doctors want the rate to be dropped back down?
In the case of physicians, this isn't just affecting the wealthy physicians. This affects most physicians because unlike personal taxes, when it comes to corporate taxes, all of your taxes are impacted. All of your capital gains are impacted. So for people who aren't incorporated, just individuals dealing with their own taxes, they get this $250,000 exemption. That doesn't apply when it's a business. And over half of physicians are incorporated. That means they run their corporations through a business. This is the way we were encouraged to function. And because we don't get pension, we don't get sick days, we don't get vacation pay, none of that, we have to save up for all of those things ourselves. And so this is like a retroactive tax on everything we saved through our corporation that happens after we pay income tax, after we pay all of our staff, pay to keep the lights on. There's this additional tax that's happening. And the reason that we're particularly worried is because it's affecting especially family docs working in the community who are just trying to run a practice, to provide that service to Canadians. And for the first time in decades, we actually saw a decrease this year in the number of family physicians in Canada. So anything that discourages people from going into family practice is worrisome.
You said you noticed a decrease. So what have you heard from potential recruits or people who are weighing whether to stay in Canada or not about how big of a deterrent this particular issue in terms of capital gains and the inclusion rate actually is in terms of whether to stay or come to Canada or not?
I think it's just another challenge that's being added. We're seeing burnout at levels I've never seen amongst physicians before. And that comes from a lot of things. It comes from the amount of paperwork, the administrative burden that they're doing. It's 10 to 19 hours a week. It's coming from problems in the system where they're not able to communicate or get the information that they need. It's coming from the overwhelming demand that they can't meet when patients need them and they're not able to provide all the care that they want. But then you just have this additional burden, this additional hit when they feel down already to then be told, also, we're going to be taxing all of your savings at a higher level so that when you want to retire, you just have that much less. Just that one extra hit on a group that's already feeling really down. And so we're really worried because we know that family practice is a critical part of our healthcare system and supports the entire rest of the system. You can't get to a specialist unless you go through a primary care provider. So this is just one extra hit that's making it harder for our family physicians. And that's definitely what I'm hearing, that they're feeling down and now they're feeling even less supported by government.
in case listeners are kind of wondering, can you give like a rough idea of how big of a dent, this higher inclusion rate makes in, say, the average doctor's, let's say, a family physician's retirement funds in terms of a range they might be retiring with less?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky question and a totally fair question. And because there's so much difference in how much the doctors make, how they invest, what overhead they paid, the range is pretty huge. So we see some small numbers for some physicians, but you see many tens of thousands of dollars for other physicians. And when you're thinking about retiring and suddenly having, $50,000 less available to you, that makes a big difference. And so we're asking them, do they work a little longer? Do they have to work a little harder? And asking them to work a little harder just feels like the wrong message right now when so many of them are talking about leaving the workplace or cutting their hours or going to a different practice, something outside of family medicine or even outside of medicine.
The CMA has actually raised this issue before. It was in April under the past president, Dr. Kathleen Ross. And so that was before, obviously, this change came into effect. And at that time, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he rejected the call from the CMA and responded saying, quote, "We're asking the most successful in the country to do a little bit more to make sure that everyone can see themselves in the success of this country," unquote. So why is this something that you're raising again now?
Well, I guess there's two things. So one is that we were raising it originally because this applies to physicians in a way that's different than individuals. We are getting taxed on all of our income because we put it through a corporation. So we're being treated the same way that they're treating Loblaws or, Amazon or any other corporation that's running in Canada. They're treating physician corporations as the same as far as the taxes, not the way they are individuals. We don't get that exemption. So that was one of the things that we were trying to flag, saying this isn't about the wealthy physicians. This is about every single one. But why we're raising it right now is that with the Prime Minister stepping down, with Parliament being prorogued, and what looks like an election coming up in the very near future, this actually has never passed through Parliament. This has never been reviewed and turned into law. And so the CRA has implemented the collection of these taxes with the assumption that it would get passed into law, but that may not happen. It's looking incredibly unlikely that we're going to see this become law with the looming election, with the fact that they're not even going to be meeting until late in March. So right now, we're seeing physicians being taxed on something that's not even law. So we're asking the CRA to stop collecting those taxes until it becomes law, or if in the case that it doesn't, stop it permanently.
There may be some listeners who are still thinking, because doctors are even your average, say, family physician, they are still high income earners in general. So what's your response to listeners who might be thinking, doctors do make a lot of money, and with this higher inclusion rate or not, they'll still have a lot more money than the average Canadian at the end of the day. They might be thinking, is this an issue the CMA should be even taking on?
There's no doubt that physicians should pay their fair share of taxes, and we're not trying to escape paying our fair share of taxes. When I think about a family doctor, they pay about 40% of their income goes to overheads. That means paying for the staff that work in that clinic, paying for the utilities of the clinic, paying for the cleaning staff. Everything that it takes to run that clinic comes out of that family physician's pocket. They also pay income tax on any money that they get to take home for themselves. And then at the end of all of this, because they don't have anyone who gives them pension or vacation pay or maternity leave, they have to save all of that. And so this tax affects anything that they're trying to save. So we want physicians to pay taxes. We value the public healthcare system, and that comes from taxpayers. That's how we're paid. It's really important that we contribute to the system as well. What we don't want is to have this retroactive tax that discourages people from going into family medicine that is not a particularly lucrative part of medicine. There's certainly some doctors that make a lot of money, but family doctors don't tend to be in that group, and that's where we get really worried. There are already 6.5 million Canadians who don't have access to a family doctor. So anything that decreases the number of people who consider family medicine is a problem for all of us.
Dr. Joss Reimer, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Joss Reimer is president of the Canadian Medical Association.
when you have to leave everything behind?
You're just trying to find a way to stay here for a better life.
What are the real costs of making a new start?
I have faced so many hardships financially, emotionally, and physically.
A CBC News series looks at what it's really like for newcomers.
I am losing hope.
Welcome to Canada, the immigrant experience.
Prepare yourself because coming here is not that easy.
Everywhere you get CBC News.
12:15 right now on Radio Noon. I'm Corey Funk, and still to come on our call-in conversation, we're going to have a cybersecurity expert join us to talk about data safety after a data breach that's impacted 28 of 37 Manitoba school divisions. Were you impacted by the Power School data breach? We'd love to hear from you. Call us after 12:30, or if you're just worried about your data in general and you have some questions, you can call us after 12:30. We're opening up the phone lines. Also, still to come in just a minute or so here, Wheat City Nuit Blanche happens this weekend, so we're going to check in with the curators to find out what surprises are in store for this year's edition. But first, let's take a look at the current conditions across the province. In Brandon right now, you are actually our hotspot right now. You are sitting at minus 11 with mostly cloudy at the airport. It's with some light snow actually at the airport. Churchill, you are minus 28 right now, some light snow and some drifting snow. Dauphin, partly cloudy, you're sitting at minus 13. Flin Flon, some light snow right now at minus 18. Gillam, mainly sunny, minus 27. Lynn Lake, sunny, minus 23. Portage, light snow right now, minus 13. To Dooley Lake, you are a cold spot, minus 31. Thompson, mostly cloudy, minus 25. And Winnipeg at the Forks, mostly cloudy, minus 13. Well, Wheat City Nuit Blanche is happening this weekend, French for White Night. It's a one-night festival of art that happens in over 120 cities around the world. It's all about giving people a chance to interact and engage with art. And this year's theme is Curious Dialogues, Conversations with Space, Time, and Beings. And Lucy Letterhandler is the artistic director of the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba and co-curator of Wheat City Nuit Blanche. Hello there.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me on.
What can we expect people expect to take in at this year's edition of Nuit Blanche?
Well, this year we have 27 different projects, and I lost count of how many participants that entails at 50, because we also have a number of ensembles that are going to be joining us. And it's a big mix of ongoing spaces, encounters, projects, invitations to collaborate, and performances that are scheduled throughout the night.
I understand last year was actually your first time back after 3 years. How did it turn out?
Well, it was my first time ever since I moved during the pandemic, and so we had a big pause in the middle. But it was just fantastic. I think that the whole kind of arts and culture sector is a little heartbroken still that there wasn't a great renaissance after things opened back up and people were allowed to participate. And what it felt like, maybe because we were kind of settling into life as normal again, but that energy that flowed through the gallery. So we had about 500 visitors, which is a lot for Brandon. And I think for any cultural event like this, and people were just so engaged, both in the sense of engaging with the projects, with the performances, and also just with the idea of being out, of being in a weird space, of the experimentation. It was really exactly what I think we all hoped for.
Wait, you said you had just moved even last year. What surprised you about Brandon's art scene?
Well, so the pandemic was hard on Brandon's art scene. It turns out that my current reality of being in charge of the only art gallery in the city, with the exception of the student art gallery at the university, which only runs student programming occasionally, is surprising. But a lot of the smaller artist-run spaces did shut down. So I'm hoping that as quickly as that happened, it will slowly begin to regenerate. We're going to have a bunch of different photography events at venues around the city for the Flash Festival. this year, and that kind of grassroots, I think, is what makes the Brandon art scene so special.
And what are some of the collaborations? Just I know there's lots going on, but a few just to kind of give people a bit of a taste of what to expect.
Well, something that's really fun about this one is that it's coinciding with the formation of a new arts group called the Rural Arts Westman, RAW Collective, that is basically self-forming in order to have access as individual artists to funding money that's only available to groups and organizations. So they've just begun. This is senior artists Chris Reed, Serene Furry, Erica Lowe, and Derek Ford are the core group of that. And they're asking visitors to come and collaborate with animations that they've all made that will then contribute to the Westman Animation Festival in October. So this idea of little by little pieces of the community kind of throwing into this greater pot of an artistic creation. Yeah.
What do you think it is about the Brandon and even the Westman in general art scene that makes it unique and special? Is there something kind of themes that run throughout that you've noticed or from the stuff that's come through the gallery?
I would say so. I'm coming in from Montreal, which always othered itself as well, just like Canada does. Especially like the Prairies does. By which I mean you're very aware of not being New York. You're very aware of these things. But in Brandon, I think that people almost celebrate that. There's a sense of hospitality, of the access that you have to every corner of the community that makes real collaboration seem possible instead of a superficial one.
And back to Nuit Blanche, at least here in Winnipeg, it's like an all-night kind of thing. Is that a similar case? Like, you expect people to be up till 4, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, or what does it look like in Brandon?
No, once again, we checked our capacity. We do hope to someday collaborate again, which before we shut down for the long break, we did have local businesses that participated. But right now it's entirely centered at the gallery, which is another really special thing about it, where you come in and you're just kind of in the space, right? You're there to discover. So we are running from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Usually people linger a little bit after that, and then we're shutting down.
Okay. And I guess last pitch, why should people come out? You said last year 500. What are you kind of hoping for this year?
I'm hoping for 1,000 this year. Why not? 50,000. Well, so it's very important. So I know Nuit Blanche in Winnipeg is in October, but for me, it was very important to keep it in these really dark days. I think we're just a week away from the most depressing day of the year. So that's why you come out, and it's a good reason to leave the house. As you said, Brandon's balmy today, so nobody has any excuses. But because it's completely unique, there's no reason to qualify the word unique. It's not going to be a replicable experience, right? Everything happens because the people who are present are going to be present at that moment in time, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, Lucy, thanks for your time and all the best tomorrow with Nuit Blanche.
Thank you, and I hope everybody can make it down.
That is Lucy Letterhandler. She's artistic director of the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba and co-curator of Wheat City Nuit Blanche in Brandon. The free event happens at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba from 5 to 10 p.m.
CBC Music Live. Head into the big venues, intimate concert halls, and small stages. Celebrate live music the way it was meant to be. Share in an unmistakable energy of being shoulder to shoulder with music fans and face to face with some of Canada's best musicians.
It's such an honor and a pleasure to play here.
CBC Music Live, brand new season. And catch past episodes right now on CBC Jam.
12:23 right now, and yes, I know Dooley Lake is a cold spot in minus 31, but imagine there are much colder places out there, especially for if you're Windsor, Ontario's Jasdeep Singh, who has joined a fairly exclusive club called the 7 Marathons Club. It's a group of comprised of people who have run a marathon on all 7 continents, and yes, that does include Antarctica. And according to the run organization Ice Marathon, only about 450 runners across the globe have ever accomplished that. Jasdeep Singh completed the feat last month when he traveled to Antarctica, and the 49-year-old only took up running a few years ago to improve his health. And he talked with CBC about the experience and what led him to this rare claim to fame.
Antarctica was just unbelievable. We read about it, but once we landed there, it was just amazing. So the first thing itself, just landing on the Union Glacier itself was amazing. The pilots were so well trained. There's no airport there. So we literally landed on the ice. They actually turned the temperature down in the plane itself. We had all the coats, all the layers on because they wanted us to get used to the cold before we step out of the plane. And then just the sun going around for 24 hours itself was a very unique experience. I've never experienced something like that before, having the sun out for 24 hours. It's a desert. Living in Canada, we are used to snow, but the snow here is packed with moisture. But out there, it was like it was sand. The snow was sand. You know, with no ozone layer, the sun being out, we were being cooked by the UV radiation. So putting on a lot of sunscreen, plus having people from all around the world come in to run this marathon just made this even more unique because everybody knew that we were into this together. We had a common objective of finishing the marathon together. The unique thing about Antarctica training was that I actually had to put on some layers and get used to knowing my body and understand how I can regulate the temperature because it's going to be really cold. And then right before we did the Antarctica Marathon, I got really lucky because Windsor got really cold just a week before I was about to fly to Antarctica. So we had like -5 degrees. So I'm like, this is great. So right before I flew, I actually did a half marathon just locally in Windsor here itself by putting on multiple layers. And then I kind of tried to see how many layers I need. I had my gloves on, I had the ice goggles on, just to see how I perspire and if my eyes like goggles get foggy. When we did the marathon, it was like -9 degrees in Antarctica. And my wife, she sent me a text saying like, Windsor right now is -9 degrees Celsius too. And she was like, you could have just run in the backyard. Why did you have to go all over the Antarctica?
Jasdeep Singh is a runner who has run a marathon on all 7 continents, and you can see photos and videos showing him in action on the CBC Windsor website and the CBC News app. And this next song we have for you probably sums up what was on his face after accomplishing that feat. This is Newfoundland's Jason Benoit with 1,000 Mile Grin.
Well, I know where I'm going and I know where I've been as I tear down this highway with 1,000-mile grin. Well, I found my conviction in the spring of 19 as the man locked me out and I could not get back in. But I saw in a vision just as clear as the day I was back in your arms in the house we both made. So I threw on my boots, threw my stuff in a sack, and I jumped in my truck and I never looked back. So I'll drive till I get there, thinking you all the while. Every light on this highway is a light in this smile. Now there's no way of knowing this fire deep inside. It would just keep on growing till it burned us alive. Well, I know where I'm going and I know where I've been as I tear down this highway with 1,000-mile grin. Now my wipers are crying as they battle the rain. In my tires, yeah, they squeal at every red light that came. Cause they know when I see you, well, that sun's gonna shine and the blue sky will pale against the blue in your eyes. Now there's no way of knowing this fire deep inside. It would just keep on growing till it burned us alive. Well, I know where I'm going and I know where I've been as I tear down this highway with 1,000-mile grin. Oh!
That's Newfoundland's Jason Benoit with 1,000-Mile Grin. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk. Well, stay tuned. Another data breach, this time involving an application used to store student information, and that is used by 28 of 37 Manitoba school divisions. It's actually software that's used across all of those divisions, 28 of them. So coming up on our call-in conversation, how worried are you about IT companies having access to your information? Or are you a parent or student or teacher that's impacted by this? We want to hear from you. Call us after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. At 12:30, we're at minus 13 degrees with mainly cloudy skies over downtown Winnipeg. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Humphrey. The president of the Canadian Medical Association says a change to capital gains taxes for medical corporations is hurting family doctors and may even discourage people from going into practice. In June, the Canada Revenue Agency started collecting taxes on 2/3 of the profits made by corporations. That's up from 1/2. CMA President Dr. Joss Reimer says most family doctors are already shelling out 40% of their income to staff and maintaining their offices.
This additional burden, this additional hit, when they feel down already, to then be told, also, we're going to be taxing all of your savings at a higher level so that when you want to retire, you just have that much less. It's just that one extra hit on a group that's already feeling really down.
Reimer says the tax change was not approved by Parliament before it was prorogued this week. She's calling on the government to stop collecting the tax and to cancel it altogether. A Winnipeg man who experienced homelessness himself says people go to emergency rooms to get warm because there aren't enough drop-in spaces in Winnipeg. This week, a man died while waiting in a crowded ER at the Health Sciences Centre. A hospital spokesperson says in cold weather, people go there to seek shelter. Al Weeb advocates for homeless people. He says he would go to the ER to get warm for a few hours, and then, if he was triaged, leave before his number would be called.
During the cold, really cold spells, Salvation Army will open their lobby and things like this, but only for short periods of time. You cannot stay there. And I think that's, again, it goes back to not having enough 24/7 shelters or warming spaces. And for a while there, the city opened up, other places, but they have not done that this year.
Weeb hopes the situation brings attention to the fact people need shelter throughout the day when it is cold. And finally, Manitoba is bucking the trend when it comes to employment. The latest jobs numbers are out from Stats Canada. Nationally, our country added 91,000 jobs in December. That pushed the unemployment rate down 0.1 percentage points to 6.7% nationally. Manitoba, meanwhile, was the only province where employment dropped. In this province, the jobless rate rose last month, 0.4 percentage points to 6.2%. And that is your CBC News from Winnipeg. For news anytime, you can head to our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba, or you can use the CBC News app.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Back soon.
That is Matt Humphrey at our CBC News desk. We are just ahead of our call-in conversation. We are going to be opening up the phone lines here on Radio News. We want to hear from you after 28 of 37 of Manitoba's school divisions are impacted by a Power School data breach. I'm sure there's many parents across the province who have been impacted by this, who got that email. We actually have one of those parents in studio who also happens to be a cybersecurity expert. He is going to be joining us, but we also want to hear from you. We're opening up the phone lines, 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. What are your concerns about data breaches in general, or this one in particular from Power School? So give us a call. But right now, before we get to that, we have Riley Lachuk in studio to give us a look at the forecast. Hello there.
Good afternoon. A little bit of snow on the way as we get into the weekend. So we'll get into that. A little bit cloudy here in the Red River Valley right now. We'll get some gradual but brief clearing as we get through the afternoon, and then we'll start to see our cloud building back in again. Minus 13 right now in Winnipeg and Dauphin and Swan River. It's minus 11 in Brandon right now, minus 24 in Thompson. Churchill's at minus 28. So we are kind of on the edge of some clearing here in the Red River Valley. So I do expect that we'll see the sun, albeit briefly, as we get through the afternoon hours before we start to see that cloud building back in. And that's already started to happen back to the west. So through the Parkland region, even a few flurries through the afternoon today for places like Dauphin through Swan River into the Riding Mountain region. That will continue as we get into the evening tonight. Our cloud builds back in across southern Manitoba ahead of an area of low pressure moving in from Saskatchewan. This will bring some snow in west to east as we head through the evening tonight. So by 8, 9 o'clock, we're already into some of that snow through places like Dauphin, Brandon, Verdun, Melita, maybe even as far north as the Paw, seeing a little bit of snow into the evening hours tonight. Winnipeg, we in the Red River Valley are kind of right on the edge. We'll get grazed by the edge of the system as it crosses through overnight into the morning on Saturday. So do expect that we'll see some periods of light snow really overnight tonight through until the overnight period into early Sunday, when we start to see a bit more clearing as we head into the day on Sunday. So tomorrow, a little bit on the snowy side. Winds won't be as strong as we have seen the last couple of days as we head into the weekend, but certainly I do expect that we could see maybe a little bit of blowing snow into the weekend here as well. In terms of accumulation into the west, particularly through Brandon, Dauphin, into Swan River, Flin Flon, the Paw, this is where we're looking at the potential for even 5 to 10 centimeters of snow through the weekend. Here in the Red River Valley, 2 to 4 centimeters, probably a good bet. Locally could see up to 5 centimeters in some locations. So yeah, we'll get a little bit of snow no matter where you are in southern Manitoba over the course of the weekend. Minus 12, our high temperature really across the Red River Valley today. Don't expect that high temperature, though, until we get later into the evening tonight. Temperatures continue to rise into the evening. Minus 10 in Brandon, Thompson and cloudy, minus 21. Winnipeg, I've got us at minus 9 tomorrow. And then we're back down into the deep freeze for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, down to minus 19s and minus 18s. And then all the way back up to minus 1 for next Wednesday.
Thank you very much, Riley.
Have a great weekend.
That is Riley Lachuk, our CBC climate change reporter and weather specialist. Well, time to turn now to our call-in conversation. Another data breach hits Manitobans, and this time involving student information. It involves PowerSchool. It's a software used by schools to store student data, and the breach happened in late December. 28 of Manitoba's 37 school divisions use PowerSchool, and here's just a list just to kind of give you an idea, or maybe if you haven't heard yet, you might want to listen to this. Divisions who have posted notifications to parents about the breach, so there might be more, but this is in terms of what we could find from just going to the websites, are Louis Riel, Beautiful Plains, Mountain View, Swan Valley, Borderland, Brandon, Rolling River, Portage-la Prairie, Hanover, Southwest Horizon, Sunrise, Western, and Red River Valley school divisions, and the Division Scolaire Franco-Manitobain. And just a heads up, Rolling River's notification said that PowerSchool told the division Rolling River School Division students and staff data was not impacted by the cybersecurity incident. And also, if you are wondering, Winnipeg School Division, the province's largest, does not use PowerSchool and is not impacted. The hack also breached school employee data, and parents and caregivers have been receiving advisories from divisions this week informing them of the breach. And to talk about why these data breaches seem to happen more often, Mark Perot joins us. He's a senior manager of security risk at Mozilla and a cybersecurity expert. He's also a parent of 2 in one of those divisions who has been impacted by this. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We also before we get chatting with you, Mark, because I'm very curious about your perspective, we are opening up the phone lines. Are you a parent, caregiver, educator that's received an advisory, and how do you feel about that? Call us, 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. You can also text us, 204-588-7355. So, Mark, what was your reaction? I'm going to start from your parent perspective, because I'm curious about that. When you got that email from the school division saying, hey, there's been this data breach from PowerSchool.
So the notification identified that that the division that my children are in wasn't affected by this breach. So for a moment there, a little bit of sigh of relief, but putting my cybersecurity hat on, I'm a little bit skeptical as to how that determination came up so quickly. I believe the breach happened between December 22nd and December 28th or something to that effect. Yeah. We're now about 3 weeks away from that. It's pretty unlikely in my experience that a full root cause analysis would have been done to determine this. So from my perspective, I'm just a little bit skeptical for them to say your kid's data is good, or even the data that I may have put into that system as far as a parent goes.
Right. So it's interesting because there was actually there's that gap there, right? So December 28th, and a lot of schools weren't notified until January 7th. Is that gap like normal in terms of from a company to getting it out to the public or the people affected, or what's the best practice in terms of when a data breach happens?
In terms of kind of first notification, typically organizations will let their customer base or the people that are affected know as soon as they can. That can come, a week or slightly, maybe 2 weeks after the breach has been known. Sometimes shorter. It's usually dependent on, gathering information, making sure that they have the proper information, and then putting that information together in I guess like a digestible format for their customer base. So, as I mentioned, initial warning is usually pretty quick. But to send out a notification that has more details on what entailed or what was entailed from the breach, what potential data was lost and who was affected, I'm just a little bit surprised that much information has come out this early.
We did reach out for comment to Power School, and they did say so. They have. They say they're committed to protecting the security integrity of our application, and they do say Power School is not experiencing nor exports to experience any operational disruption and continues to provide services as normal to our customers. But if from a customer perspective, when something like this happens in a company like Power School, I mean, it's a large company. It might be the only one that actually offers these kind of like services. But what would you think as a school division? Like, what should some decisions be? Do you think you advise them to pivot away or?
Typically, and even in my experience with organizations that I've been in a similar type of, management perspective, we usually don't typically do a knee-jerk reaction where we would pivot away, but we would want to know more about what are they doing to, prevent this from happening in the future or reducing the risk of it happening in the future. Because let's be honest, cybersecurity events are, pretty rampant and they are pretty difficult to completely defend from. So I would want to know, what is being done in that regard. It sounds like the statement that you just made is a very generic statement that any organization would probably, release. So while that, is great, I think most divisions that are using this software would want to know exactly what is being done and finding out a little bit more about what happened in this breach. Like sometimes, there's for legal reasons they can't release exactly what the root cause of it was, or exactly what the method of attack was, just to prevent future attacks or anything like that. But they should still have, the onus is on them to at least provide information of how they're going to remediate that issue. And then if there is data that has been released, what are they going to do to compensate the individuals who have been affected by it?
Power School also told CBC in that statement, the incident is contained and we do not anticipate the data being shared or made public. From like a background kind of cybersecurity perspective, how can a company know that or kind of be able to give that assurance that they don't anticipate the data being shared or made public?
So based on what I've seen, it sounds like Power School had a video of the attackers deleting the data. I mean, you can put that data on a very large USB drive. It could be, pushed into a cloud server somewhere. They're I mean, you're dealing with criminals at the end of the day. How much they want to trust that these criminals have, permanently deleted that data from being published on the dark web or something like that. That's up to them on how much trust they have in a criminal organization, right? So my personal, trust in that is quite low. That's not to scare anyone, but the reality is that organization could hang on to that for years to come, and decide to release it if they wanted to, right? So, or they could come back and say, hey, guess what? We didn't release it, or we didn't delete that data. We still have it. We want more money. Like, who's to say they won't do that?
So how worried do you think, you kind of qualified it there, but how worried do you think parents and caregivers and teachers should be right now?
So a lot of that depends on what data was being stored in those systems. I, for one, am going to go back into, where my children go to school and check in Power School to see what data is actually stored on my kids in there. Like, does it go to the extent of their, personal health or identification numbers or anything like that? I don't believe it does, but I do want to see that. I want to see, is it their full names, their address, their date of birth? All of that is critical information. Like in the world of identity theft, that information is worth a ton. So that, it's not always about financial information like credit card information or banking information. That personal information is also very valuable to attackers, and that information at the very least would be in those systems.
And generally speaking, what safeguards can people take when they provide any of this personal information? Because it must be difficult because all you did was send your kids to school.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah.
Right? So, and it seems like no matter what you do, even if you think it's something minor, suddenly now you realize you also made your family vulnerable to these attacks. So in terms of just where we're at these days, what can people do?
So there are those, those systems that I believe TransUnion, for example, or TransUnion Credit has, this credit monitoring, which includes a dark web monitoring for personal information. So those types of systems can be used to, try to keep an eye on things. They essentially, the way those work is they look at breach records that have been made public. They scrape those and see if your data is in there. At this point, I believe I'm registered with one of them from a previous breach from last year. So I've been checking there to see if there's been anything obvious and keeping an eye out for alerts. But as of now, haven't seen anything yet. And I'll be sure to ensure that, my kids' names are registered as part of that service as well, because they beforehand wouldn't have been part of that.
204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. Are you like Mark, one of your kids, in a school division that uses Power School, and maybe they are impacted by this or not, kind of depending what notification you got from the school? Give us a call, 204-780-0893. I just want to zoom out a little bit because we've had you on before to talk about these data breaches, but it does seem like they're becoming more and more common. Like, are they like? Are you noticing even at Mozilla things like that? Like, is it just like we're just constantly on the defensive now? Like, well, what's happening?
Yeah, like specific to Mozilla, we deal with active attacks and that kind of thing. Every business does, so that's nothing new. But I feel like the scope of where these big attacks are going has broadened. If I say I were to go back 3 years ago, you wouldn't typically see school divisions being attacked by these kinds of things. I don't know if it's that attackers back then had a different level of respect for the education system or that kind of thing, or non-for-profits. But now it's just there's zero discretion on who they attack. They basically figure, well, someone is going to pay this, or if they don't pay, they're going to pay in a different way, right? So it's just and the part of the issue I feel is that the more that organizations pay these attackers, the more that they succeed and the more that they're going to continue to do it. And I mean, you're going to eventually, probably take a very long time, but you're going to run the well dry on who your attacks are against, right? So they have to be strategic about hitting different organizations and letting them recoup and potentially hitting them again. So really, it's going to be endless, and like I said, it's sprawling out in terms of the different industries that they're starting to attack.
I know this was the company Power School, so it wasn't
Right.
a direct target on school divisions, but I am curious. This is data that includes information about minors. Does that extra sensitivity to that data make it more valuable in a strange way? Is that does that make school divisions even more of a target going forward?
So I would say, in terms of, if you look at if there were to be some sort of identity theft or some sort of personal information theft of somebody who was, retired, older, unfortunately, they're not going to be around as long. Students who are going to, an elementary school, they're going to be around probably for a lot longer. So now, the more time that a malicious organization has to collect data on that person. So let's say you have a child that's 6 years old. Their data just got pulled into this. So they have a small subset of that data now. Over the course of the next 10 years, those attackers could just be stockpiling additional data. That could be social insurance number. It could be, even things as ridiculous as like height and weight, if that was recorded in something. It could be bank account information once they're an adult. Like, it just continues to stack on. So they're basically like building almost like a database of people right from, that young age.
I never thought about it as a cumulative thing before, where because I think we've all got those emails where like your data has been breached,
Right.
and you kind of think about it as an isolated thing. But how common is that? It's just like could be the same organization just slowly building a profile on you.
Yeah, there's no reason why they wouldn't be able to do that, right? And again, this goes back to the assertion of was the data deleted or not? Well, probably not. It was probably deleted, in terms of not going to be pushed out into the dark web, but they still may retain it to continue, like I said, to stockpile information on certain individuals.
So just because it's been said that it's deleted doesn't necessarily mean it's not
Right.
out there in the world still somewhere.
Agreed.
Well, we'll leave it on that very cynical note. Thank you very much for your time, Mark.
Yeah,
We
no
appreciate
problem.
it.
Thanks for having me.
That's Mark Perot. He is the Senior Manager of Security Risk at Mozilla and a cybersecurity expert. Well, we are going to pivot a little bit here at 12:50 to something a little bit more fun here. So when you think of 80s pop music, you probably don't think about killer clowns, creepy cats, and the boogeyman next door, but those horror movie motifs were the original inspiration behind Michael Sembello's hit Maniac. But the version the one that topped the charts, is about cutting up the dance floor. So how did it go from beast to beauty? Rich Turfry has the story in this edition of Rearview Mirror.
There is quite the story behind the song Maniac by Michael Sembello from the soundtrack of the 1983 movie Flashdance. The song started out as something very different from what it became. Maniac was written by Sembello and his songwriting partner Dennis Matkoski. The spark was lit for Matkoski while watching a story on TV about a serial killer. In an interview in 2021, Matkoski said he believes it might have been a story about the killer clown John Wayne Gacy. Matkoski thought to himself, "It would be just my luck that someone like that lives next door to me." With that, he reached for a notepad and jotted down the following couplet. "He's a maniac, that's for sure. He'll kill your cat and nail him to the door." Looking for further inspiration to complete the song, Matkoski rented a cult horror movie called Maniac, which was released in 1980. After watching the movie together, Matkoski and Michael Sembello started riffing on ideas, pushing the limits of how outlandish they could be and trying to make each other laugh. According to legend, a demo of the finished song was accidentally included on a tape that Michael Sembello sent to Paramount Pictures of songs for consideration for the Flashdance movie. Director Adrian Lyne loved the beat and synth motif and felt it worked perfectly for a particular scene. When an edit of the movie was complete, he had grown attached to the song and so asked music supervisor Phil Ramone to reach out to Matkoski and Sembello about revising the song with new lyrics that fit the movie's plot. Critics mostly hated the Flashdance movie, but it was a huge hit with audiences. The movie's budget was $7 million. At the box office, it grossed over $200 million. The soundtrack was equally huge. It went to #1 on the Billboard Albums chart and sold over 20 million copies. Maniac was released as the second single from the album. It went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and held the spot for 2 weeks. The single was particularly popular in Canada, where it achieved platinum sales status. A song that started out as a story about a serial killer that turned into a story about a dancer and became one of the most iconic hits of the 80s. This is Maniac by Michael Sembello on Rearview Mirror.
That's Maniac from Michael Sambello. Thanks to Rich Fry for that story. Well, it is 12:56 right now, and I have with me someone who is not a maniac. Chloe Friesen is here in studio with me. She's hosting Up to Speed today from 3 to 6. And we were both talking about it. I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard that song in full because I'm
the full
millennial,
version.
Gen Z. We're both like, I think I've only heard this in Swiffer commercials
Yeah. Some good afternoon TV. There's a mom and her Swiffer dancing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of
Yeah.
like being homesick or something like that. And that's what comes on. But it's apparently a full song that was in a good movie. So there you go. But tell us, though, you're hosting Up to Speed from 3 to 6 today. And what kind of stories you working on?
Yeah, Corey, speaking of homes, actually, excellent segue. The Winnipeg Renovation Show is this weekend at the RBC Convention Center, and a home reno celebrity is joining us ahead of that show on Up to Speed. And I'm going to name some of the TV shows that he's hosted, and I'll see if you can guess who it is.
Okay.
Ready? Island of Brian, Leave It to Brian, House of Brian, Brian Incorporated, Brian's All In, Rock the Block, Canada's Handyman Challenge, Disaster DIY, and Renovation Resort.
It's Mike Holmes.
Brian Balmer.
Brian Balmer. Okay.
Joining us,
oh my
Canadian kind of renovation hero.
That's exciting.
Is coming on to Up to Speed, so we'll talk to him about some of the home reno trends of 2025.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're a new homeowner.
I'm a new homeowner, so I got some personal questions. Do you have any questions for Brian? What are you doing with your home these days?
I have a crack in my
we're
bathroom
being played out.
ceiling.
We're being played out. Thanks, Marshall.
Thank you, Chloe. That's Chloe Friesen hosting Up to Speed today from 3 to 6. Thank you to everyone who put together today's show. Our technician is Marshall Hodgins. Our director is Sierra Sanders. Wendy Parker is our producer, and our YouTube live stream producer is Kevin Nipatebo. Also, from Louis Riel School Division, he is an intern. Chin Kai Chang is in studio as well. Thanks for your help as well. Thanks to Nelly Gonzalez, our show producer, and Leif Larson is our senior producer of audio. I'm Corey Funk, and whatever you find yourself doing on this lovely weekend ahead, hope you find yourself doing something you love with the people you love. Coming up on CBC Radio 1, CBC Podcast Showcase. Have a good weekend.